Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive,
Yeah.
where we like to kind of cut through all the noise and really get to the heart of the most important global economic insights.
Exactly. And
Yes.
and this week we're
Yeah, this week we're dissecting a really interesting episode of Al Jazeera's Counting the Cost
Mhm.
that aired just earlier this week.
Yeah.
It was packed with some key takeaways from 2024 and some, you know, pretty intriguing predictions for 2025.
Mm,
So if you're out there and you're a globally minded listener, or especially if you're a UPSC aspirant,
right.
you're definitely in the right place.
Yeah, it's interesting because the program highlighted this real sense of uncertainty. I mean, that kind of seems to be pervading the global economic outlook. For instance, even though the IMF declared victory over inflation last year,
Right.
there's still a lot of debate about whether that's truly sustainable.
You're right.
Yeah.
It seems like the counting the cost experts weren't entirely convinced by the IMF's optimism. One expert, Bilal Highs, who's the founder of Macro Hive, he even used the term sticky inflation,
Oh, yeah.
suggesting that it might be lingering around a little longer than we'd all like.
And there are a number of factors that could contribute to that stickiness.
Yeah.
The ongoing conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, for example, are still creating a lot of geopolitical instability.
Right.
And, historically, that kind of tension has a way of putting upward pressure on oil prices.
But surprisingly, oil prices have remained relatively stable so far, haven't they?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if maybe the markets are becoming desensitized to conflict,
Mm-hmm.
or if there's some kind of delayed reaction that we should be bracing for.
It's definitely a puzzle.
Yeah.
Bilal has actually weighed in on this in the Al Jazeera episode.
Okay.
He predicts stable or even lower energy prices in 2025.
Wow.
Due to increased supply and the belief that geopolitical tensions won't significantly disrupt production.
Okay.
But of course, there's always a risk that unforeseen events could throw those predictions off course.
Of course. Yeah. And speaking of unpredictable events, we can't ignore the elephant in the room.
Right.
Donald Trump's return to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
The Counting the Cost episode definitely highlighted the uncertainty that his presidency brings to the global economic stage.
Yes, particularly with his protectionist stance and the potential for trade wars.
Right.
He's already threatened tariffs on BRICS nations if they move forward with a new currency.
Right.
And remember all his campaign talk about imposing a 10% tariff on all Chinese goods on day one?
Yeah.
Those kinds of actions could have significant repercussions,
Oh, yeah.
especially for developing economies that are heavily reliant on trade.
That potential for a trade war really stood out to me in the Al Jazeera episode.
Yeah.
It made me think back to the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930, which many economists believe exacerbated the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Some experts on the program argued that a trade war would hurt American consumers the most because they'd be paying higher prices for goods.
Right.
But others, like Ian Golden, a professor at Oxford,
Yeah.
painted a much bleaker picture, suggesting that it could lead to inflation's slower growth and even greater inequality in the U.S.
And it's not just the U.S. that would feel the impact.
Right.
The Counting the Cost experts emphasize that a global trade war would disrupt supply chains worldwide,
Oh, for sure.
increase costs for businesses, and likely lead to slower growth across the board.
Right.
Plus, there's the risk that it would damage trust in the global trading system,
Yeah.
making it even harder to cooperate on other challenges like climate change.
It's almost like we're seeing this dangerous shift towards protectionism and isolationism just when global cooperation is needed more than ever.
Absolutely.
And this brings us to another key takeaway from the Counting the Cost episode.
Yeah.
China's dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
They're grappling with an economic slowdown, dealing with deflation, and facing increased pressure from the U.S.
The program pointed out that China's economy is facing some unique challenges.
Okay.
They're actually struggling with overproduction and underconsumption, which is the opposite of what we're seeing in many parts of the world.
Oh, wow. It's creating a very complex situation for Beijing, especially considering the unpredictable nature of U.S. policy under the Trump administration.
And with those U.S. policies looming, one expert, Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at the Hinrich Foundation,
Yes.
suggested that China might be forced to forge stronger economic ties with Europe to counterbalance the pressure from the U.S.
Interesting.
It's a fascinating dynamic, and it highlights how the global economic landscape is becoming increasingly multipolar.
Elms described it as a law of the jungle environment where old rules no longer apply,
Wow.
and countries are scrambling to adapt to this new reality.
And speaking of adaptation, let's turn our attention to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
The Counting the Cost episode didn't paint a particularly rosy picture for the EU.
Right.
It seems they're lagging behind both the US and China in terms of economic competitiveness.
Yeah.
They're dealing with a shrinking workforce and population, which limits their potential for growth, especially compared to the dynamism we're seeing in Asia.
That's right.
And Ian Golden, the Oxford professor we mentioned earlier,
Yes.
Argued that Europe's economic model, which prioritizes social safety nets and work-life balance, might actually be contributing to this slower growth. He suggested that Europe needs to focus on tighter integration, especially when it comes to capital markets, and adapt to a more service-driven economy where the impact of AI on growth might be more limited. That raises an interesting question, though.
Yeah.
Does Europe have the political will to make these changes, especially considering the political turmoil we saw in France and Germany last year?
That's the crux of the issue, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
one thing to identify the problems. It's another thing entirely to implement the solutions, especially when those solutions require significant structural reforms and potentially unpopular choices.
And with the added uncertainty of Trump's policies, it's going to be a tricky balancing act for European leaders to navigate these choppy waters.
Definitely.
But despite all this uncertainty and these challenges, there were some glimmers of optimism in the Counting the Cost episode.
There were a few, yeah.
Several experts, including Ian Golden, pointed to the potential for continued growth in Asia, advancements in biotech and renewable energy,
Right.
and the possibility of AI driving growth in specific sectors.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's this tug of war between the forces of disruption and the forces of innovation.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to make sense of this complex, interconnected world where opportunities and risks are constantly emerging.
Right.
It's a fascinating puzzle, and the Counting the Cost episode provided some valuable pieces.
It did.
But there's still a lot to unpack and analyze.
Absolutely, and that's precisely what we're here to do.
Okay.
We'll continue to delve into these key takeaways and explore some of the nuances and implications in more detail as we move forward.
So for our listeners, especially those preparing for the UPSC exams, we encourage you to stay tuned.
Yes.
We're going to connect these global economic trends to potential exam topics and provide you with the insights you need to excel.
And for all our listeners out there,
Yeah.
don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into the most pressing issues of our time. You know, one of the most insightful aspects of the Counting the Cost episode was the way it challenged traditional economic thinking.
Right.
It really underscored this idea that we can't rely on, those old models and assumptions
Yeah.
in a world that's changing this rapidly.
That's a great point. We need to develop new frameworks and, a more nuanced understanding of risk to truly grasp the dynamics at play in
Exactly.
the global economy.
For instance, the episode highlighted how interconnected everything is.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. A war in Gaza can impact energy prices,
Right.
which then affects inflation in Europe, which
Yeah.
in turn influences China's decision-making on trade.
Wow.
It's a complex web, and we need to be able to connect those dots.
And the Counting the Cost episode provided some valuable threads to help us do just that.
It did.
One of the most prominent themes was the rise of Asia as a global economic powerhouse. Almost all the experts, even those with a more cautious outlook,
Right.
agreed that Asia is driving global growth right now.
And it's not just China anymore.
Right.
While China's slowdown is certainly a significant factor, the episode highlighted the emergence of other Asia economies,
Oh.
like Indonesia and Vietnam.
Yeah.
These nations are stepping up to fill the void and contributing to a more dynamic and multipolar economic landscape.
Ian Golden, the Oxford professor we mentioned earlier, even stated that if he were in Asia right now, or even in parts of the Middle East like the Emirates and Qatar, he'd be feeling quite optimistic about the future.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That optimism stems from the fact that these regions are experiencing strong growth and attracting significant investment.
Right.
They're also becoming hubs for innovation, particularly in sectors like technology and renewable energy.
But of course, this shift towards an Asian-centric global economy isn't without its challenges.
Right.
The Counting the Cost episode touched upon the potential for increased competition for resources, heightened geopolitical tensions in the region,
Yeah.
and the need for strong leadership to navigate this complex transition.
Deborah Elms from the Henrik Foundation expressed concern about the lack of a clear leader to guide this new economic order.
Okay.
With the U.S. seemingly retreating from its role as a global economic leader, It's unclear who, if anyone, will step up to provide stability and direction.
And that lack of a clear leader could exacerbate some of the other challenges we're facing,
For sure.
like climate change pandemics and economic inequality.
Yeah,
It's becoming increasingly apparent that these are global issues that require global solutions.
right.
And yet, as the Counting the Cost episode pointed out, global cooperation seems to be declining.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
It is.
They're more interconnected than ever before,
Right.
yet we seem less willing to work together to address shared challenges.
Yeah.
And that lack of cooperation could have profound consequences for the global economy, leading to greater instability and potentially even conflict.
Speaking of challenges, the Counting the Cost episode also delved into the potential risks and opportunities facing Europe.
Right.
While acknowledging the continent's economic struggles, some experts, including Ian Golden, highlighted some unique strengths that Europe possesses.
Yeah, one intriguing argument put forward by Golden was that Europe's social model, with its emphasis on work-life balance and social safety nets, might actually become a competitive advantage in a world increasingly disrupted by automation and AI.
It's an interesting perspective, isn't it?
It is.
Perhaps in a future where jobs are scarce and economic anxiety is high, Europe's focus on quality of life and social well-being will become more appealing.
Right.
It could even attract talent and investment seeking a more sustainable and equitable way of life.
And Europe is also positioning itself as a leader in green technologies and renewable energy,
Okay.
which could become a significant source of growth and influence in the coming years.
But of course, Europe also faces significant obstacles,
It does.
like the need for deeper integration and capital market reforms.
Right.
And then there's the ongoing uncertainty surrounding Donald Trump's return to power.
Ah, yes, the wild card that could potentially upend everything.
Exactly. Let's dive back into that a little deeper.
So the Counting the Cost experts seem to agree that Trump's protectionist policies would likely harm the U.S. economy more than anyone else's in the long run.
Okay.
However, the damage wouldn't be confined to U.S. borders.
That's right. The episode stressed that a global trade war would disrupt supply chains worldwide, increasing costs for businesses and consumers, and likely leading to slower growth globally.
Mm-hmm.
And as we mentioned earlier, it could further erode trust in the global trading system, making it even harder to cooperate on pressing issues like climate change.
It's like adding fuel to the fire of global instability.
Yeah,
And it highlights the need for a more strategic and collaborative approach to global economic governance, something that seems to be lacking at the moment.
absolutely. We can't afford to simply react to events as they unfold. We need to be proactive, anticipate potential risks, and work together to build a more resilient and equitable global economic system.
And that brings us to a key question that the Counting the Cost episode posed.
Yeah.
Are we entering an era of deglobalization?
Ian Golden actually argued that what we're seeing is not so much the end of globalization, but rather a rapid transformation of it.
He coined the term Asian globalization, referring to the shift in economic power towards the East.
And while this shift presents both opportunities and challenges, Golden also cautioned about the potential for a collapse of global cooperation.
Right.
He believes this lack of coordinated action could lead to increased systemic risks in areas like climate change, pandemics, and conflict.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is.
The very systems that were designed to manage global interconnectedness seem to be fraying at the edges just when we need them the most.
And that's why deep dives like this are so crucial.
Right.
We need to understand these interconnected risks, not just in terms of their economic impact,
Right.
but also in terms of their social and political consequences.
We need to ask ourselves some tough questions.
Okay.
Are we prepared for a world where economic power is more diffuse?
Yeah.
Where geopolitical tensions are rising,
Hmm.
and where the rules of the game are constantly changing?
And perhaps most importantly, can we find ways to rebuild trust and cooperation in a world that seems increasingly fractured and divided?
These are questions that the Counting the Cost episode didn't fully answer,
Right.
but they certainly got us thinking.
They did.
And that's the power of a good deep dive, isn't it?
It is.
It's not just about absorbing information. It's about provoking new questions, challenging assumptions, and expanding our understanding of the world around us.
So for our listeners out there, especially those preparing for the UPSC exams, we encourage you to think critically about the information we've discussed.
Yes.
Don't just take our word for it. Dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and form your own conclusions. After all, in a world where change is the only constant, the ability to think critically and adapt quickly is the most valuable skill you can possess.
And for those interested in a deeper exploration of these topics, The Counting the Cost episode we've been discussing is definitely worth a watch.
Okay.
You can find it on the Al Jazeera website.
We'll provide a link in the show notes.
Great.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, let's shift gears and explore some of the more specific predictions and opportunities that emerged from the Counting the Cost episode.
Okay.
We'll delve into potential new sources of economic growth, the challenges of technological disruption, and of course the ever-present uncertainty surrounding Trump's return to power. So we've explored, some of the broader trends that are shaping the global economy.
Right.
But let's zoom in a little bit on
Okay.
some of the more specific sectors of opportunities that the Counting the Cost experts kind of highlighted for us.
Yeah.
One area that really generated a lot of buzz was biotech and renewable energy.
Yeah, several experts, particularly Ian Golden, seemed quite bullish on these sectors.
Okay.
He believes we're on the brink of some major breakthroughs
Wow.
in areas like medical devices and personalized medicine.
Muy bien.
And when it comes to renewables, the cost of solar and wind energy has plummeted, making them increasingly competitive with fossil fuels.
Yeah, the Counting the Cost episode even highlighted some countries that are leading the charge in renewable energy adoption.
Oh, right.
For example, Costa Rica has been running almost entirely on renewable sources for several years now.
That's impressive.
It's a remarkable achievement and a model for other nations to follow.
Absolutely. And as these technologies continue to advance and become more affordable, we can expect to see a global shift towards cleaner and more sustainable energy sources.
Right.
This transition presents a tremendous opportunity for both investors and those interested in careers in the green economy.
Speaking of technological advancements, the Counting the Cost episode also explored the potential for AI to drive economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
But there were some differing opinions on just how transformative this technology will be. Some experts like Ian Golden believe AI will revolutionize certain sectors,
Mm-hmm.
while others like Deborah Elms were more cautious, suggesting that its impact on overall economic growth might be more limited.
Yeah, Elms also raised some important concerns about the potential downsides of rapid technological advancement.
Okay.
While innovation can create new opportunities, it can also lead to job displacement and exacerbate existing inequalities.
Right.
We need to be mindful of these challenges and ensure that the benefits of technology are distributed more equitably.
That's a crucial point. We can't just blindly embrace technology without considering its potential social and economic consequences.
Right.
We need to invest in education and training programs to help workers adapt to these changes and ensure that no one is left behind.
The Counting the Cost episode also emphasized the importance of adaptability
Okay.
in this rapidly evolving economic landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Deborah Elms actually used a powerful analogy to describe the situation.
Okay.
She compared the current state of the global economy to an earthquake,
Oh, wow.
followed by a series of aftershocks and tsunamis.
Wow.
Her point was that in this kind of environment,
Yeah.
it's impossible to predict exactly what's going to happen next.
Right.
We need to be flexible, agile, and willing to embrace uncertainty.
It's almost like we need to develop the new economic intuition,
Yeah.
one that can anticipate sudden shifts, identify unexpected opportunities,
Right.
and navigate a world where volatility has become the norm.
I think that's a brilliant way to put it.
Yep.
It's not just about crunching numbers anymore. It's about understanding the underlying forces that are shaping the global economy
Right.
and being able to adapt quickly to changing circumstances.
And that brings us back to the central theme of this deep dive, the need for a new kind of economic thinking.
Absolutely.
We can't rely on old models and assumptions in a
Okay.
world that's changing so rapidly.
We need to be able to connect the dots,
Yeah.
see the bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
and understand how seemingly disparate events, from a war in Gaza to a slowing Chinese economy to the return of Donald Trump, are all interconnected.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to find ways to rebuild trust and cooperation in a world that seems increasingly divided.
I agree.
The challenges we face, like climate change, pandemics, and economic inequality, are global in nature,
Yeah,
and they demand global solutions.
absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the global economy of 2025, inspired by the insights from Al Jazeera's Counting the Cost program, we leave you with this final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Given the predictions of stable energy prices amidst all this geopolitical tension, is the world becoming desensitized to the impact of conflict on the global economy? Or are we on the brink of a major disruption that we're not yet prepared for?
We encourage you to ponder that question and share your thoughts with us on social media.
And for those preparing for the UPSC exams, we hope this deep dive has provided you with some valuable insights into the complexities of the global economy.
Definitely.
Remember, staying informed and engaging in critical analysis are key to success.
And to all our listeners out there,
Yes?
don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more insightful explorations of the most important topics of our time.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.